What about you, Yoseph? Do you agree with your sister?
Let me say this. Sorry. I think a good way of assessing, or as you put it, issuing the report card for the tenure, the one-year tenure of the Prime Minister and his team would be taking a step back and looking at what the state was at in terms of its trajectory, in terms of what the advent of these reformist-minded EPRDF leaders could have averted in terms of avoiding the catastrophe that would have followed. If you look at the tensions that were boiling in the country, the protests that were taking place virtually in all parts of the country, you have a government nominally really strong with very sophisticated security and military powers, but unable to control popular protests that have been pent up over many decades of really repressive rule. So if you look at from the point of view of those reformist leaders within the EPRDF leadership coming up with some sort of accommodating views of the demands of the protesters, and also from the point of self-preserving EPRDF, I think the judgment so far could be, and I believe should be fair, particularly if you look at the first bold step measures that the new government took in terms of freeing all political prisoners, in terms of opening up the media and launching on a really comprehensive review of legal and institutional reforms is really commendable. But like Lily was saying, there have been a number of shortcomings in terms of living up to people's expectations. I think there have been a lot of desire on the part of citizens to see a country which, despite all its complex problems, lifted up into some sort of calm and stability. And I think that is not a very realistic wish in terms of people, but what the government, I think, should do in terms of communicating what they have been able to achieve and what they have in store in terms of restoring public faith, in terms of reforming institutions, in terms of changing the way their security, their military, their police are operating, in terms of bringing back public faith in the civil service, and most importantly, I think, dealing with these recurring incidents of ethnic and communal violence through a political and legal means that can sustain the positive feelings that people are still extending, I believe, towards the new government. So I would reserve judgment in terms of actually asserting that the reform has serious shortcomings to the extent of derailing it, but I think with better communication, with proactive engagement, with articulating a compelling message as to what they use, how expectations are going to be managed, I think there is still a chance for Abiy and his government to actually transition this really bold political experiment, which has been unthinkable a couple of years ago in the way, looking at the way that the country has been going to. So that is, I think, my assessment.
Have you had an opportunity to be back on the ground during the period that Abiy Ahmed has been the new kid on the block?
Yes, I have been able to go back after 9 years in exile. I have been back in January 2009, and I was able to engage with a number of actors as part of my job, including civil society leaders, government officials, media practitioners, and regular folks, both inside and outside of Addis Ababa, and trying to get a feel of how people are managing and how people are assessing these really dramatic changes that have been taking place over the past year in terms of the opening up of the political space. But I think what struck me really most was that the environment that people are experiencing in terms of experiencing views freely. You look at the number of FM radio shows and the variety of topics that they are really allowed to entertain. I still acknowledge that there is a number of excessive concentration in urban centers, particularly in Addis Ababa, in terms of extending those free discourses on major political and socio-economic topics. But the air of freedom on the part of people is really very visible. I'm saying this because I have had the opportunity to work with human rights activists for many years, even after coming here to the United States. When you meet these human rights activists, even outside of Ethiopia, during the reign of Meles, during even Haile Mariam, there is this instinctive reservation to hold their views in terms of not saying.
So people are cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, critical.
We'll get to that and more later.